What if I told you that some of the most respected scientists in history deliberately tortured people, broke their minds, and ruined their lives, all in the name of research? And that some of these experiments were funded by your government? Today we are diving into 5 psychological experiments that crossed every ethical line imaginable. These are not urban legends. These are documented, verified events that changed the rules of science forever, because they had to. Stay with me. Number 3 on this list genuinely kept me up at night. Let us start in 1939 at the University of Iowa. A speech pathologist named Wendell Johnson wanted to prove that stuttering was not something you were born with. It was something created by anxiety and negative reinforcement, a learned behavior. And to prove it, he designed an experiment so cruel that his own colleagues later nicknamed it the Monster Study. Johnson and his graduate student, Mary Tudor, selected 22 orphan children from a state institution in Davenport, Iowa. 22 kids who had no parents to protect them, no one to say no on their behalf. They split the children into 2 groups. The first group received positive speech therapy. They were told they spoke beautifully, that their words were clear and confident. The second group? They were berated. They were told they were stutterers. Every time they spoke, researchers mocked their speech, interrupted them, told them they were failing. These were children as young as 5 years old. Here is what happened. Several of the children in that second group, children who had been perfectly normal speakers, actually developed speech problems. They became withdrawn. Some of them stopped talking almost entirely. The psychological damage lasted their entire lives. Johnson never published the study. He knew what he had done. The results sat buried in a thesis for over 60 years, until a journalist uncovered them in 2001. In 2007, the state of Iowa paid nearly $1 million in settlements to the surviving victims. Mary Tudor, the graduate student who ran the day-to-day sessions, reportedly visited the orphanage afterward trying to undo the damage. She could not. Now we go back even further. 1920, Johns Hopkins University. A psychologist named John B. Watson wanted to prove that fear was a conditioned response, that you could literally program a human being to be afraid of anything. And his test subject was a 9-month-old baby known only as Little Albert. Watson and his assistant, Rosalie Rayner, placed Albert on a mattress and introduced him to a series of objects: a white rat, a rabbit, a dog, a monkey, masks, and burning newspapers. Albert showed no fear of any of them. He even reached out to pet the rat. Then the conditioning began. Every time Albert reached for the white rat, Watson would slam a steel bar with a hammer directly behind the baby's head. The sound was enormous and terrifying. Albert would scream and cry. They did this over and over again. Within weeks, Albert was terrified of the white rat. But it did not stop there. The fear generalized. Albert became afraid of anything white and furry. Rabbits, dogs, even a Santa Claus mask with a white beard. Watson had successfully implanted a phobia into a baby's mind. And here's the truly disturbing part. Watson never deconditioned Albert. He never removed the fear. Albert's mother pulled him from the hospital, and the boy disappeared from scientific record. For decades, researchers tried to find out what happened to him. The leading theory, published in 2012, suggests that little Albert was actually a boy named Douglas Merritt, who suffered from neurological problems and died at age 6 from hydrocephalus. Watson went on to a career in advertising. He used what he learned about conditioning to sell coffee. All right, number 3. This one is famous, and for good reason. 1961, Yale University. Stanley Milgram wanted to answer a question that was haunting the world in the aftermath of the Holocaust. Could ordinary people be made to commit terrible acts simply because an authority figure told them to? Here is how it worked. Volunteers were told they were participating in a study about learning and memory. They were assigned the role of teacher and instructed to administer electric shocks to a learner in another room every time the learner gave a wrong answer. The shocks started at 15 volts and increased in 15-volt increments all the way up to 450 volts. That last switch was literally labeled XXX. The learner was an actor. No real shocks were given, but the teachers did not know that. As the voltage increased, the actor would scream, beg to be released, complain about a heart condition, and eventually go completely silent. The teachers were visibly distressed. Many of them trembled, stuttered, and begged the experimenter to let them stop. But the experimenter, wearing a gray lab coat, would calmly say things like, "The experiment requires that you continue," and "You have no choice. You must go on." 65% of participants delivered the maximum 450-volt shock. 2/3 of ordinary people were willing to potentially kill a stranger because a man in a lab coat told them to. Milgram ran the experiment in multiple variations. When the authority figure was in the room, obedience was highest. When the teacher had to physically press the learner's hand onto a shock plate, obedience dropped. But 30% still went all the way. Quick pause here. If you are finding this as disturbing and fascinating as I did while researching it, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. We do deep dives like this every single week, and I promise you the next 2 experiments on this list are even darker. All right, let us keep going. August 1971, Stanford University. Professor Philip Zimbardo converted the basement of the psychology building into a mock prison. He recruited 24 male college students, screened them for psychological normalcy, and randomly assigned them to be either guards or prisoners. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. It lasted 6 days. Within 36 hours, the guards began to psychologically torture the prisoners. They forced them to do push-ups. They stripped them naked, they put bags over their heads, they denied them food and sleep. They forced them to clean toilets with their bare hands. They locked them in a dark closet they called the hole. And remember, these were college kids, normal, mentally healthy college kids who knew this was a simulation. Prisoner number 86112, a student named Douglas Corpy, had a complete psychological breakdown on day 2. He screamed, he cried, he became incoherent. Zimbardo initially resisted letting him leave because he thought Corpy was faking it. By day 5, the guards had become so sadistic that Zimbardo's girlfriend at the time, fellow psychologist Christina Maslach, visited the experiment, saw what was happening, and told Zimbardo that what he was doing was monstrous.